Hi, and it's a welcome, and for some of you, I hope it's a welcome back from me, John Hoyle, to my Faith and Finance channel. And we're continuing now our studies in St. John's Gospel. And we're now up to the fifth video, which is concerned with the I am statements of Jesus. For this video and the next three, I want to focus on these statements made by Jesus, as we remember that the I am statements of Jesus are only found in St. John's Gospel. The synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke do not record Jesus making these specific statements, and that's another way in which St. John's Gospel stands apart from the synoptics, clearly by saying things like, I am the bread of life and I am the resurrection of and the life. Jesus was trying to tell his hearers something about himself and something important. But before looking at any of the I am statements that Jesus made in any detail, I think it's correct for us to sort of have a look at the background to all this. I think it's important that we look at the background to this, because when Jesus said, I am the bread of life, it was a very emotional thing for him to say, probably not only for him, but particularly for his hearers, because it harkened back to the Old Testament. So let's now have a look at what we're talking about as we go into the Old Testament, to look at the Old Testament names of God that tells us something about God. For instance, Elohim tells us that God is all-powerful and infinite. El Shaddai tells us that God is almighty. Yahweh tells us that he is the eternal God from everlasting to everlasting. Jehovah tells us that he is the supreme God. Now, we can contrast these four Old Testament names of God with the New Testament name of God that Jesus used in the Lord's Prayer, which of course was Abba, Father, our Father who art in heaven. And this use of Abba, Father, is an Aramaic expression that contrasts, I think, with the Old Testament names. But interestingly enough, God in the Old Testament gave himself a name, and this comes in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, when Moses, and I'm sure you remember the story that Moses tried to free the Israelites from slavery in Israel under his own, in Egypt, sorry. Moses tried to free the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt under his own strength and power, and it has to be said, made a bit of a mess of it, and ended up killing an Egyptian and fleeing from Egypt when it became widely known. And for 40 years, Moses tended the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And one evening I think it was on Mount Sinai, he was tending the sheep when he saw a burning bush, which was burning, but was not consumed, just simply burning away. Moses turned aside to look at the burning bush, and God spoke to him through the burning bush and said, take off your sandals, Moses, because the ground you are standing on is holy ground. And then God revealed his plan to Moses, and that was that Moses would go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And then Moses would, of course, go to the Israelites themselves and tell them that God had sent him to free them. And that was kind of where Moses' authority would come from. I think it's true to say that Moses was, shall we say, less than enthusiastic about this idea. And one of the first kind of queries he raises with the Lord is his authority for taking these actions. And I'm reading now from the Amplified Bible, Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. Then Moses said to God, behold, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, you shall say this to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. So there we get God, as it were, giving himself a name. I am who I am. So God is saying, I am Elohim, all-powerful, infinite God. I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. I am Yahweh, eternal God. I am Jehovah, supreme God. I am all of these things and more. I am complete in myself. I am who I am. And this is, as I say, God giving a name to himself and giving that authority through his name to Moses to go and speak to the Pharaoh in Egypt and then to the Israelites in slavery. So as we sort of now move on to look at a particular encounter between Jesus and the Pharisees, and that comes in John chapter 8, when the Pharisees were constantly harassing Jesus, I think it's fair to say, questioning him about his authority. And in John chapter 8, we have a particular confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees that nearly ends up with a lot of violence. And it centers on the person of Abraham. And if we pick it up in John chapter 8 and look at, where are we? Pick it up in verse 39. That's they, the Pharisees, answered, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, then do the works of Abraham and follow his example. And slowly but surely, throughout chapter 8, this confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees builds up into a climax when we get to verse 57. Then the Jews said to Jesus, you are not even 50 years old, and you claim to have seen Abraham? Verse 58, Jesus replied, I assure you and most solemnly say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. And that, without question, is a link back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. And God saying to Moses, I am who I am. This use of the expression I am by Jesus is quite deliberate. And look at the reaction of the Pharisees, the violent reaction of the Pharisees, verse 59. So they, the Pharisees, picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus concealed himself and left the temple. So the point being that by saying those words that Jesus said, I am, before Abraham was born, I am, he was saying that he pre-existed before Abraham, that he was there at creation, and that he and God were one, And also, I think the emphasis here is that Jesus is everlasting. He is, timeless. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that was not lost on the Pharisees, who considered what he had said blasphemy. Hence their reaction of picking up stones to throw at Jesus, because that was the Old Testament punishment for blasphemy. And so I think we can look at that and think about the emotional response here of the Pharisees to Jesus, using that simple expression, I am, and look at the reaction it produces from them. So as we look at the I am statements of Jesus, I'd like us to sort of keep in mind the background to that expression, I am, which is undoubtedly used by Jesus and goes back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. So I hope you'll have a look at my next videos, which I'm going to do on this, and thank you for watching this video.